All right. So, sometimes you just come across these stories and they just, they really stick with you, right? They get under your skin.
Yeah.
And this case that we're diving into today, it's one of those, man. I mean, based on this, like, really intense account that we got from a YouTube video transcript by Ray William Johnson, right? This is about Ricardo.
Mm.
Later became known as the Night Stalker.
Yeah. A name that sends chills down your spine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's pretty rough. So just, fair warning for anybody listening out there. This is a pretty intense story.
Yeah, right from the start, gotta acknowledge that, like the profoundly graphic and unsettling nature of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
The goal here isn't to sensationalize or to kind of revel in the horrific details.
Yeah.
But rather, like, try to understand how Ricardo, what he did, how it progressed,
Yeah.
and what ultimately led to him, getting caught. So buckle up. We're going to be going through some dark territory here. But, the aim is to extract understanding, not to dwell on the macabre for its own sake.
Totally. Totally. And it seems like the roots of this really messed up story, they kind of go way back, right? Like right back to his childhood.
Mm.
There's a couple of really unsettling anecdotes from back then. So the first one involves his older cousin, Mike,
Okay.
who was a Vietnam War vet. And this guy, like, shared all these really, really graphic war stories, I guess, with, Ricardo, who's only like 12 at the time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it gets worse, though. Like, these weren't just stories. Apparently, Mike showed him Polaroids, like really gruesome photos of women who had been brutalized.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So, you think, a kid would be horrified or
Yeah,
disgusted, right?
of course.
But the transcript says, like, Ricardo was just, like, fascinated by this stuff.
Wow. So we're already seeing early on this kind of warped reaction to extreme violence.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, how much of that comes from these early experiences, right? Like, I mean, it seems like it really messed with his development, his sense of empathy.
I mean, it's definitely a big red flag, right?
Yeah.
That kind of early and intense exposure to violence. And the fact that he was fascinated by it, not repulsed by it, it really makes you wonder about, what kind of impact that had on him. It raises serious questions about early trauma and whether it can actually disrupt, the normal development of empathy, of moral reasoning.
And then it doesn't stop there, right? Like, about a year later, this is just insane. He actually witnessed Mike, his cousin, murdering his own wife during an argument.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. And again, the transcript says that Ricardo, he wasn't, like, horrified. He was still just fascinated. Like, what does that do to a kid?
It's really hard to imagine. I mean, most kids witnessing something like that, especially within their own family, it would be incredibly traumatizing, right? But for Ricardo, it seems like his baseline for what's shocking or disturbing was already completely skewed.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you have these really, really deeply disturbing childhood events, and then, according to the transcript, he kind of goes down this path of more trouble, right? Mm-hmm. Starts experimenting with drugs, like hallucinogens specifically.
Wow.
Starts doing petty crimes like shoplifting.
Mm.
Then, for some reason, gets really involved with religion, like super into it, and then just drops out of high school. It's like this chaotic, like destructive search for something. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he was just searching for some kind of meaning or belonging, but in all the wrong places, right? It definitely seems like those early experiences just laid the groundwork for a really troubled adolescence.
Yeah, yeah. And then at 17, he gets this job at a Holiday Inn.
Hmm.
And this is where things like really start to escalate.
In terms of criminal behavior.
Yeah.
Oh.
At first, it's just like sneaking into guests' rooms, stealing valuables, pretty standard stuff. But then it takes this really, really dark turn. He starts attempting to sexually assault some of the guests.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I mean, unsurprisingly, he gets fired. But it's this really, really alarming progression, right? From just like petty theft to this really violent and invasive behavior.
Absolutely. That escalation it's a huge turning point, right?
Yeah.
It's a big leap. You go from theft, which is, a crime against property, to attempted sexual assault, which is, it's a crime against someone's body, against their mind.
Yeah.
It shows this growing sense of entitlement, and this willingness to inflict harm on other people. Like, he's not just taking stuff anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And the fact that, getting fired didn't seem to deter him at all.
Right.
Like, he just didn't care.
It really makes you wonder if he felt any remorse at all, or if he just like totally disregarded the consequences of his actions.
Yeah. Yeah. So then fast forward about 5 years. Ricardo's now 22.
Hmm.
Moves from Texas to San Francisco. Maybe looking for a fresh start.
Yeah, you would think.
You'd think, but according to the transcript, that is definitely not what happens. Like, he spends most of his time, doing drugs. He completely lets himself go. Hygiene is out the window. I mean, the description it's pretty rough. Like, junk food, soda, never brushing his teeth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the transcript uses the term stank ass, which, I mean, you can just imagine.
Yeah, you paint a picture.
And then, after about 2 years of this, he just has this, like, chillingly detached thought, right? Something like, you know what? I think I'm going to start murdering people. Sounds like fun.
Oh my God.
It's like just completely devoid of empathy. It's scary.
That's bone chilling, man. I mean, that statement, if it's true, it's a huge red flag. It suggests this like total breakdown of moral inhibitions. We're potentially looking at like psychopathy here.
Yeah.
Like a profound lack of empathy and remorse, where the suffering of others doesn't just not matter. It might even be like enjoyable to him. And that extreme self-neglect you were talking about, I mean, that could be part of it too. Like this broader detachment from reality, just a complete erosion of self-respect and by extension, any respect for the lives of other people.
Yeah, yeah. So this brings us to, I mean, the main part of his really horrific crimes. His first murder, according to the transcript, was a 9-year-old girl.
Oh, God.
She had just lost a dollar bill, and he, like, preyed on her innocence,
Yep.
lured her into the basement of the hotel where he was living, said he'd help her find it. And then, he sexually assaulted and murdered her.
It's absolutely devastating. Just the exploitation of a child's vulnerability in such a horrific way. It's really hard to process.
Yeah. And then just like 3 months later, he moves to Los Angeles, takes up residence in a Skid Row hotel. And then one night, he starts stalking the 79-year-old woman in the suburbs, breaks into her home, brutally sexually assaults her, stabs her to death, steals her money and jewelry. It's like the violence is escalating and getting tied up with like robbery and stuff too.
It seems like he was maybe targeting people who he perceived as even more vulnerable, like older people in their homes. And the fact that it's all like mixed together, the sexual assault, the murder, the theft, it suggests like a really complex and disturbing set of motivations.
Yeah. And then after 9 months, things get even worse.